Our next concept is diffusion. This is where solutes move through a solution to reach an equilibrium. Solutes are things that are dissolved in water. Solutes diffuse through a liquid to reach an equilibrium. That means that the solutes will become equally distributed through the entire fluid. Let's see the combination of the concept of diffusion and the concept of filtration. Here we have an ordinary tea bag. It's surrounded by a filter. What's a filter? It's a membrane with holes in it, and inside is tea. Now, I like to drink tea, but I do not like to drink tea leaves. So when I place the tea in my cup of hot water, the water will diffuse into the tea bag. The solutes that are in the tea leaves will filter through the tea bag, leaving the big particles behind. And I think you can see now that enough of the solutes from the tea leaves have left the tea and gone into my cup that I'm starting to get a glass of hot tea. Although I think, since I've already made it, I'm going to drink that one instead. But you see that slowly the tea, whatever it is in those tea leaves that's free to move through that membrane, is slowly coming out of the tea bag, filtering through that membrane, the piece of gauzy paper, whatever they put around tea, slowly coming out, and it's diffusing through the water, and eventually it will reach an equilibrium. Right now, there's more tea coming out of the tea bag. This area is actually a little bit darker, and the bottom area, which is farther from the tea bag, is a little lighter. But eventually, all the tea that wants to leave that tea bag will come out, and it will reach an equilibrium and become the glass of tea that I want to drink. Okay, when we talk about things diffusing through water, we're talking about solutes and solvents. The word solvent means the liquid that something can be dissolved into, for instance, water. The solute is any substance that can dissolve in water, for instance, sugar or salt or various ions can dissolve in water. When you add a solvent and a solute together, you get a solution. A solution is a solvent with the solute in it. So a solution contains solutes dissolved in the water. This is a glass of plain water, but water can be a solvent, meaning that things can get dissolved in it. So let's make a solution by adding some solutes. So here I take granules of green sugar. Can you see quickly that the sugar and the green dye start diffusing into the water, eventually making it all green. All the sugar is now dissolved, and the green has distributed itself all the way through. So now the sugar and the green dye have reached an equilibrium in the glass of water. It has now become a solution of sugar and green dye. Your blood is actually a solution. In that blood are red blood cells, which turn it red, and white blood cells, and proteins, and also sugar in the form of glucose, and fats in the form of fatty acids. All these things are found in your bloodstream. So it's no different than if I take this sugar cube and drop it into this glass of pink water. And if I'm impatient, I'll stir it. But eventually that sugar will dissolve and it will diffuse through my bloodstream and be equally distributed through the blood. Eventually, that sugar will diffuse out of my bloodstream into the tissues and then diffuse into the cells where my cells can use it. Unfortunately, sugar doesn't go into cells very easily. It would like to. There's a higher concentration of sugar in my blood than there is in the cells. But there's no free flow through there because the doors for the glucose in my cells are closed. So there's an actual gateway that allows sugar to get into the cells. In order to open that gate, we need a hormone called insulin. When insulin is present, then I can get sugar into the cell. With the helper of insulin, I'm going to be the insulin here, I can open a gate in the cell, and then the glucose will be able to leave the bloodstream and go into the cell. Without the insulin, the cell stays closed, and I can't get any sugar into the cell. With insulin, the door is opened, and I can take the sugar and bring it into the cell. This is called facilitated diffusion, because for sugar to get into the cell, I need a helper to open the gate in the cell and allow the sugar to get in. So in review, facilitated diffusion is a passive action where the solute diffuses passively into the cell, but with help. The solute has a higher concentration outside of the cell, but it cannot enter the cell because of the semi-permeable aspect of the cell membrane. So we need a helper. The most easy to understand and the most common thing you're going to run into is glucose and how glucose gets into a cell. Glucose moves into the cell by facilitated diffusion. It wants to go into the cell, but it can't, because in essence, the cell wall prevents it from moving in. It's too big. It cannot get through the cell membrane. So here's what the cells in our body have done to fix this problem. We have a hormone called insulin. When insulin combines with the cell, it acts like a key. And that key opens the door on the cell for glucose, and glucose will diffuse into the cell. Glucose cannot enter the cell without help. So insulin acts as a key that opens the door or unlocks the door for glucose to pass its way, passively diffusing itself into the cell. Without insulin, the glucose stays in our blood, dissolved in our blood until it gets to our kidneys, where eventually it will be excreted into the urine. And that's called diabetes. Diabetes is the illness where a person does not have enough insulin, or the place where the insulin hooks onto the cell, called a receptor site, is not functioning properly. And so glucose levels in the blood go up because this glucose cannot get into the cell, because either they don't have insulin or the place where the cell and the insulin attach, called a receptor site, is not working.